Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It's Tuesday, May 1st, 2012, and our special guest is Larry Johnson from the New Media Consortium. Larry, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. Click my video here just briefly to wave to everybody. I'm not going to do a lot of video. I'm at a Kimpton Hotel in San Jose, and you just got to love this wallpaper.
I'm going to turn my video off as well. I'm seeing some slowdown for some people with video. Thanks for being here, Larry. The Future of Education is a Web 2.0 Labs project, all about creating conversations between educators, students, teachers, parents, the like. We thank Blackboard Collaborate for the use of this room. This is the 5th anniversary of Classroom 2.0, 67,000 educators talking about Web 2.0 and social media and education. We're having a lot of fun. We have a PBS NewsHour at Incubator Project. We have the crowdsourced book. We're really desperately waiting for Chris, our editor, Chris Dawson, to ship out the first chapters, but we had, I think, 130 submissions, and we're so excited to get them going. Anyway, classroom20.com, lots of fun going on this year. Please come visit us. If you're coming to the ISTE conference, we have so much that takes place there. We have our own little sort of shadowy set of events. Starting on Saturday with the all-day unconference, used to be called EduBloggerCon, is now called Social EdCon. Goes from there to the Bloggers Cafe, ISTE Live. We're probably in about 3 weeks we'll put up the schedule for ISTE Live. If you've never presented at ISTE, or you didn't get accepted to present, or there's something that came up since the presentations were submitted, you can sign up to present. We'll have a place for the presentation. We'll be streaming them live. So anyway, lots of fun. Hope that you'll join us. ISTEunplugged.com. The Social Learning Summit was on April 21st, 73 sessions. I think we decided there were 13 sessions from 13 countries. This was sponsored by Discovery Education and Classroom 2.0. They're all up at sociallearningsummit.com. All of the recordings are all about social media and Web 2.0 in the classroom. The Future of Libraries Conference, we've just done the call for the advisory board, partners and sponsors. Later this week, we'll be putting up the call for proposals. That's October 3rd through the 5th. Really a great conference on the future of libraries, sponsored by San Jose State University. The Global Education Conference has a new sponsor. It's IEARN. We're so excited about that. November 12th to 16th, 5 days, 24 hours a day, hundreds of sessions. We hope that you'll join us. That's globaleducationconference.com and library2012.com. And coming up, we're going to do a Gaming and Education virtual conference and the Alternate Education Conference. These are all free, thanks to our sponsors. Coming up Thursday, Buffy Hamilton and Kristen Fontecario are going to talk about school libraries. What's now, what's next, what's yet to come, their crowdsourced book. Mark Bauerlein joins us on the 15th to talk about The Digital Divide, his new book, sort of a pro and con looking at all things digital. John Edelson will talk about learning and e-portfolios. Elizabeth Merritt talks about the future of museums on the 24th. I actually met Elizabeth at the New Media 10th year, the Horizon 10-year event in Austin. Thanks to Larry, Brian Alexander as well. Anyway, lots of fun coming up. Just today, Tony Wagner confirmed that he'll come on the show to talk about his new book on teaching innovation. If you've missed the show, they are all up and recorded. Richie Norton talked to us about resumes are dead. Unfortunately, the email for that was delayed 3 or 4 days, so we had a light audience. But his book went to #1 of the free books on Amazon, and he thinks we may have done it through the email. So it's actually a delightful book. You can read it in half an hour. Very interesting, sort of thinking about how the world of work is changing. Julie Lindsay and Vicki Davis talked to us about flattening classrooms. John Hunter and Chris Farina talked to us about 4th grade world peace and other 4th grade achievements for their movie that comes out this month on PBS. Anyway, lots more, all up in full Illuminate recordings in an MP3 format. Hope you'll find something valuable there. Okay, I'm going to give you permissions now for the whiteboard. To the left, you should see some icons. You're looking for the star, the second one down. You double-click on that and then click on the map. And do put a shout-out in the chat. Let us know where you're participating from. It's fun to know the time and the temperature. New Zealand, Australia. Lovely to have you here. Interesting. 3 from Australia so far. Speaks to the scope of your work, Larry.
Yeah, we are wrapping up a project in Australia. We're going to release it in just a couple of weeks.
We're going to give you a chance to talk about all of that work. Anyway, we're delighted to have you here wherever you're participating from, and if you're listening to the recording, we sure thank you for doing so. So Larry, you've prepared by creating some slides. I've got lots of great questions for you. But before we start with that, I'm very interested in your own personal history and how it's impacted the work that you've done.
Oh, wow, that's a wide open question.
Well, you worked at the university level, right?
Yes, I did. I was in higher education for many years. I was also working in community colleges and served as community college president. And back in the early days when I was a faculty member, that was when we were just beginning to think about networks, and I was one of those people that would come in the weekend and pop the ceiling tiles up and run wires down the hall so that we could have those early versions of the networks. But you know, it's been an interesting time. The state of education over the last 30 years, which is kind of my perspective on it. We've had a lot of successes, and we've really met some incredible challenges along the way. And one thing that feels very much the same as it did 30 years ago when I was coming in on the weekend to pop those ceiling tiles is, you know, I keep wondering, well, how am I going to, you know, cobble together the next thing that looks interesting and fun.
Fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to let you drive the slideshow. There are some arrows at the top of the screen, right and the left. Just make sure that follow button is checked up there. There should be a check mark in it, but you can actually move the slides forward. I'll let you do so. I'll ask you to dwell at certain places. Then once we get through the slide deck and have those conversations, we'll come back, do a little bit of additional drilling down, and go to Q&A.
Okay, and along the way, I just want folks to know I'm pretty comfortable with following the chat, and so I'll be following the chat in the room, and if people have questions in there, I'll try and spot them as we go. But I wanted to start off with a bit of retrospective and give those of you who are on the call a little context for what Steve and I had planned to talk about for most of the time we're going to do. And that is this project called the Horizon Project that we began in 2002 and just celebrated its 10th anniversary. 10 years of looking at anything is a long time, and 10 years of looking at emerging technology all over the world has given us some, I think, unique perspectives on things, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today. And over that time, this slide actually, I'm looking at, I realize it's already out of date because we are just releasing actually kind of an unpublicized release on this call, the results of the 2012 K-12 Horizon Report, which is being published as we speak. That will take that number to 22 editions, and then we have 3 other projects that are in the queue. So we're going to be going to 25 editions of the Horizon Report in the next couple of months. And the number of translations as well is going to go up to over 40 because we have another 5 in the queue. We've been hard at this for some time, and the project originally began just looking at higher education. That was the world that we worked in, and really nobody was talking across sector lines back then, or at least we didn't know anyone that was doing that. And so for the first few years of the project, it was just purely a higher education project. And we began publishing the reports in 2004. Before that, it was an internal project, just an environmental scanning project. But 4 years ago, we began looking at K-12 education. Keith Kruger at COSN had encouraged us to think about doing a similar project as we did in higher ed for K-12, and it just immediately made sense. And there's been so many things that have come out of it. Yeah, Steve, you got your hand up.
I have my hand up. So you and I shared a cab in Australia a couple of years ago when I thought you said essentially you might not actually do the K-12 report again. You weren't confident you were going to get sponsors. Did that shift dramatically enough that this is something you know you're going to consistently keep doing?
Yes, I have to say that, you know, and as Steve notes, we put this thing together in the beginning with really just passion and a dream. There wasn't really any money involved, but the research doesn't cost a lot of money, but it does require some funding to sustain it, particularly as the project's gotten larger. And when Steve and I were both at the VITA conference in Melbourne, we were right in the middle of discussions, and I was very worried that we were going to be able to continue it. But thanks to the generosity of the Hewlett-Packard's Office of Sustainability and Social Innovation, we've been able to put a very solid footing under that project, and I feel confident that we'll be doing it for the very long term, not just because we have the funding, but also because we've really been able to get past the chasm with the K-12 report and the traditional diffusion of innovation curve to the point where people really do anticipate it. It's a piece of work that people use and want to contribute to, and that is going to sustain it just as much as the generous support of HP as well. So we have a good feeling about all three of these global reports. And that's one of the things that came out, Steve, of that was, you know, as we began to think about how could we scale the Horizon project, because we were getting a lot of interest in those days, we needed to both scale it and also figure out a way to rein it in. And so what we came in on was that we have 3 Horizon report editions. One is aimed at higher ed, comes out in February. One is aimed at K-12, it comes out in June, late May and June. And one is focused on museums, which for us is a proxy for informal ed, and it comes out in the fall. But we also do a growing number actually, of regional technology outlooks. And these are specialized Horizon reports. I mentioned that we were just doing one for Australia. The letter will be released on May the 10th at an event in Brisbane that I'm heading down to next week. We just did one in New Zealand in November. We're doing one in Latin America right now. We're about to embark on a big project in Asia. We've just wrapped up one in last fall for the UK, and you know, we're looking at India and Africa and other parts around the world. We've just signed an agreement with Brazil. Those are projects that are typically funded either by a coalition of educational organizations in those countries or the Ministry of Education. And that's the long-term future of the Horizon Project. That is what sustains us and gives us a way to make the project work. Go ahead, Steve.
So I know you tell this story a lot, but for those who are encountering this for the first time, basically the Horizon reports provide insight into technologies that are most likely to make a significant impact across 3 time horizons. I'm reading from your material, based on the consensus of opinions of an advisory board. Right. So you and when you report, you actually report more than just those I think it's 6 trends. You typically report the other ones that are sort of on the short list. But the goal is to look at what technologies are going to have an impact in these areas, right?
That's right. The process is one that we've refined now over many years, but it begins with that group of experts that we call the advisory board. And it's usually 45 or 50. In the case of the global reports, we try and get them, if there are 50 advisors, we want them to be from 20 different countries at least, so that it has a large international footprint. But we look for people from journalism, from industry, from education, people that are educational leaders, as well as people that are in the trenches, teachers and bloggers, and Steve has served on this group a number of times. And essentially what the research is we work with those experts to find out what they agree about. What are the most important technologies that are coming down the pike? The way that we frame it is if you were going to focus on just two technologies that are going to be important in the next 12 months, these are technologies that probably lots of schools are already using, and really there's a case to be made that every school ought to be looking at them. What are those? And that's the first adoption horizon. Then we ask a similar question for the period of time that's 2 to 3 years. But out 2 to 3 years, we're often talking about technologies that are only in a handful of schools, if any. They may be very popular in entertainment or business or other sectors, but not quite in education yet. And then we also look out at a 4 to 5 year horizon. And some of those things are actually just being invented as we speak. We typically look at about 80 to 100 different technologies as we start the project. And we distill it down to 2 that we publish and highlight within each of those adoption horizons. And along the way, we also look at, we ask our experts to help us think about the key trends that are going to drive the implementation of these technologies, as well as the obstacles that they're going to have to solve or go around to help them to be implemented. So that's the basic idea of it all. Keep wanting to click the arrow on my laptop here. Now, all of that data that we collect goes into a resource we call the Horizon Project Navigator. And Navigator is an open content, open source database. It lives at navigator.nmc.org. And it has become, over the last 5 years, the largest repository of information about EdTech projects that we know of anywhere. So thousands of educational technology projects there. Now, one of the things that we do to help our advisors all start on the same page is we're very much involved every single day scanning the news, research reports, and relevant research to make sure that we're able to look at 5 years. And we scan, our list right now is about 700 publications worldwide. They're not all in English. We look at Spanish language and Portuguese language, German, French, and other languages as well, along with English, to just have a sense of where things are going. And all of that information goes into Navigator as well. So it's a collection of not only the 80 to 100 technologies that we're tracking, but all the news and such that we have been moderating, and that database of projects. And all of it is available, yeah, there we go, that's Navigator on the web. And if you click the projects link, Steve, you'll be able to go to a map and get a sense of what's in there. Now, what we've tried to do with Navigator is to build it into the actual center of everything we do in the Horizon Project. And so this is a map of all the projects that we're tracking, and if you zoom in on the map, the numbers will disaggregate, so there's several hundred in North America and so forth. And when we get ready to do the first draft of the Horizon Report, this is where we go for the initial descriptions of the technologies, because they're all fresh in here. The list of readings and demonstration projects all come out of here. If we can get back to the PowerPoint, we've made that super easy now with an iPad app. Soon to go to Android as well for Galaxy and the other tablets that are about to come out, and it provides a nice little collection. And so you can get the top 10 news stories every week that are curated out of all of those hundreds of publications that we track. Our researchers in the office pick 10 every week that are featured as HZ News. You have a little doorway that takes you into the entire Navigator database from here. Plus, you can You have access to every Horizon report that's ever been published in every language that they've ever been published. And that's not free. I wish it could be. We're not for profit, and so we put it up there as a way to help fund the project as well. But every penny goes to support the research. So a little plug there. Yes, Steve, go on ahead.
So, Larry, beyond kind of brain fun, thinking about the future and thinking about these technologies, so who's using that app in really practical ways?
We don't have as good a data about that as I wish we did. We know more about it with the higher ed community that we work with most closely, and it is used primarily for strategic planning. And so, as schools and universities are thinking about where do they want to spend the technology money they do have, they very much look at it in a couple of different ways. They want to think about what those trends and challenges that we identify mean locally, but they also want to reflect on and understand the technological developments that we're highlighting in there as well. So it's primarily a technology planning tool. Why don't we take a look at what we've just found? Maybe this is a good place to transition to the results for this year. What I've done on this slide is I've compared what we came up with last year, 2011, with what we've come up with in 2012. And there's some interesting developments here. Cloud computing first came on the scene for the K-12 report in 2010, and it was in the midterm horizon, and then it just blasted to the near term. And I would say that it would be a pretty rare school today that is not doing something related to the cloud. Pretty much every teacher I talk to seems to be aware of things that, just all sorts of tools that you can use in the cloud, but schools are also using it to provide off-site storage and all sorts of things. And it's a good example of a technology that we tracked as it was coming towards schools, and also as it was really making its way rapidly into the mainstream. And now it's no longer listed in the 2012 list because it's here. Cloud computing is already here, and the Horizon report is really about things that are still coming. Mobiles is one that's been in the near-term horizon for a while, but the darn technology just keeps changing all the time. And the thing that has really made it interesting last year and this year, of course, is the emergence of the apps as a way to extend the utility of these devices, and then tablets with the iPad kind of leading the way, creating an entirely new category of technologies. And so in 2012, we see both of those really dominating the near term, and that's really what I'm seeing out in schools as well. You got to comment on that, Steve? Go ahead.
This is what I do. Sorry. Okay. So there were two additional technologies that were in the 1 year or less short list that you chose not to put in, right?
Well, they were not. It wasn't me. It was the experts. It didn't make the final cut. We do a series of rankings using a process called the Delphi Process. And first we get to a list that Steve's referred to as the short list, which has 12 technologies on it, and then we reduce it to the final set of 6. But yes, the ones that fall off the list are pretty interesting as well.
The higher ed report, you actually you did an editorial bit where you said, even though the group came back with this, we don't think it's realistic. I think it was social reading. How often does that happen?
Yeah. That doesn't happen very often, but it's one of the strengths of the Delphi process that we use. And when you work with a group of real experts, they're often out inventing things, all the time. One of the reasons why we want them is because they're so clever and creative. And ideas come up, and social reading is a good example. It's got such a great name that in the initial ranking, it made the cut, and so it became part of the short list. But what we do with the short list to make sure that the ones that get in the report are really valid is we take that list and then we go out and we really research it. So we want to make sure, for example, if social reading is going to be something that we're going to say is important, then our expectation is that we're going to find considerable research supporting it. We're going to find news stories about it. We're going to find demonstration projects, because very few technologies originate in education. We adopt them from somewhere else. Now that's not universally true. There are some notable exceptions, but in the case of social reading, we went out and looked at things, and we realized this is still a concept. It's a great concept, and the notion is really compelling, which is why people liked it, was that that students could sort of merge their reading assignments with social media so that they could have live, real-time discussions even outside of school. It's a cool idea, but we didn't find anything to support it. So as we went back to ask for the final cut, and this is part of the process, we revealed what we had found. In fact, we do that both when we find a lot of interesting stuff. The voters find out about that, but they also find out if we don't find out.
So I know you're going to get to the wiki, but Craig is asking in the chat, is there a link for social reading? And my guess is that if someone were to go to the wiki for the higher ed report, that they would be able, and I'll put the link up here, but I think you're going to show the wiki, that they would be able to find material on that trend, right?
Well, they could find the discussions that led to it, and let's see, that would be Horizon.
I put it in there.
To go here, so give me a second. Oh, okay, good. I'm looking here for research question number 2. Going to put this link in here. Let's see. That is where topics like this come up, and they're topics that are not on our list. And so you'll take that link and you'll go to a wiki page for the higher ed report in this case, which was the answers that our experts had to what key technologies are missing from our list. And so we had things like flipped courses, which is going to make it in next year's report, I'm pretty certain, because it's just starting to get very, very interesting. And things like the Internet of Things, which ultimately did make it in, and massively open online courses, which is going to make it in the Australian report for the first time. And notions like open badges, and somewhere in this list is social reading. I'm not finding it immediately, but that's where that sort of thing appears. And if it gets voted in that first round of rankings as something potentially important, we go look at it.
Larry, so how often does a technology take you by surprise? And are there times when a technology you thought was going to really make it big just kind of dies off? Do you have stories of either of those cases?
Absolutely. And anybody that works in these vineyards very long does as well. But one that I would put in the second category is one that, and that's virtual worlds. And we stumbled onto virtual worlds really very early, ahead of just about anybody else. We started our project when we were working with MacArthur on the Social Digital Media and Learning Initiative in January of 2006. And then in July of 2006, Second Life appeared on the cover of Business Week, and it just kind of got really crazy for 2 or 3 years. And lots of people really put a lot of effort into trying to understand that technology. And it looked pretty interesting. And in fact, we had a project that we used to demonstrate all sorts of interesting dimensions of what was possible to do there, but the technology didn't advance. It kind of is still today almost exactly where it was then, and people were excited about, this is my editorializing, I think people were very excited about the promise of virtual worlds, and they were willing to live with the reality of virtual worlds for a time, with the expectation that it was going to get to another place where some of the things that weren't perfect, and there were quite a few of those, might be resolved, because the potential seemed really powerful. Unfortunately, for whatever reasons, there weren't competitors entering the marketplace. Some of the lab decided to take a different direction, and there hasn't really been anybody else step up, and so the interest clearly began to wane in 2008 and 9, and now what we're seeing is a classic Gartner hype curve, where Second Life fell all the way down in the trough of disillusionment and lingered there. But now there are some notable projects. I mentioned the Ramapo project is one that continues to do good work in there. There's some great work from East Carolina University in there, and a handful of others that have figured out a way to do some amazing things. But as far as a mainstream technology, that one is pretty much fallen off our list. Cloud computing is one that came along so strong, so fast, that we were barely able to write it up before it was already upon us. And so, you see both, which is why it's very important to do the extra homework to make sure that what we're reporting on is real, and has a valid potential. The good news is, for us anyway, that all of the technologies that we've ever published in the report have turned out to be important in some way, and I would even put virtual worlds into that, because I think we learned a lot along the way about a lot of things related to 3 dimensions and simulations, and it informed gaming even in some ways, and so there was a lot of good that came out of that work, even if the original technology that took us there I don't think is going to survive. So that's a great question. There's another one that's on this list that is similar to virtual worlds. Augmented reality has some features that can absolutely overlap with virtual worlds, although there's not the notion of an avatar or identity, and some of that stuff is not in here. But that has been on the higher ed side on the list for a long, long time, and remains on the list here in 2012 for K-12.
So Ruben, I don't know if I'll say his last name correctly, Puentedura, gave a talk in Austin that just blew me away. And it was about sort of the evolution of mankind and how old things were to us as a species, starting with social much earlier than mobility, visualization, storytelling, and gaming. Has that talk held up for you? Have you looked at some of these trends through the lens of that talk, and does it make sense? Do you think he has onto something?
Ruben's one of the most brilliant people that I know, and so absolutely, I recommend people go to see that video. It's on YouTube, and you can just look up Ruben's name, or look up 6 minutes with, and a list of NMC 6-minute videos will come up, and Ruben's is one of them. But what his point was is that there are archetypal tools that humans have used forever. One of them is storytelling. It's a way that we capture big ideas and make sure that we preserve values and methods, and all sorts of things get embedded in the story so that they can be preserved and passed down through the generations. And his perspective was that tools that become mainstream by and large touch these archetypes, and they solve essential needs, essential in the sense of essential to being human sorts of needs, and it's really a compelling idea, and resonates, around a lot of the choices that are on this list. So one that is interesting in a way like that is game-based learning. Game-based learning has been something we've been following since 2005. So for 7 years we've been following game-based learning, and it always seems to be just over the horizon. So much promise, so much potential, so many people interested in it, and such interesting real-life, practical examples of how people have used it well. But it still just hasn't quite tipped, and we talked about that in the report this year. But one of the reasons why we keep it in here is because of the kinds of reasons that Ruben talks about, because games are one of those archetypes. It's a way that humans learn. It's a way that they become expert at things. They get to practice, and so it's a fairly interesting one. Personal learning environments has taken a very interesting turn this year. We've been following that one for a number of years as well. And for the first few years, in fact, 1 year, we had to advise people that really there were only 2 papers that we could find that were about PLEs, and there just wasn't anything else out there. That was back in 2009. And we couldn't recommend it for inclusion in the report that year. But work has continued in developing these ideas, and it's a compelling set of notions that has been mixed up from time to time with other notions like learning management systems or e-portfolios, and there are groups of folks that define PLEs in terms that make them either fit very nicely with an LMS or an e-portfolio, or actually be a variant of one of those. But what we began to see this year, and I think it's really an outgrowth of apps and the way that you can assemble such a personal collection of software tools in ways that you never could before, because now it's very inexpensive, very accessible. Many of them are free, and people have begun thinking about a personal learning environment perhaps being your own personal collection of tools and resources that might look very much like what you have on your iPad. It's an interesting idea, and a brand new breath of air into that topic that's got a lot of people excited. So that one has moved up in time because it's now got some momentum behind a way that people can see how to implement it. And so there's the list of technologies. Why don't we move on to talking about trends, because where we like to get to before we're done is to really talk about the really, really long-term trends. But we look at trends just as significantly as we do as with technologies. And so the trends for the coming year that were identified, there were 6. Actually, they identified about 24, but these are the top 6, and they're actually in priority order. And they're interesting because there's only really one of them that has much to do with technology. The first one is really just an acknowledgement of how the internet and the ways we use it has really challenged us to rethink what an educator is and what an educator should do. If you're able to go and find all sorts of facts at a push of a button, what does that mean for us? Well, I think we all have very substantial answers to that. but the fact that it's the #1 trend, I think, is telling. BYOD, very much a topic of conversations everywhere I go this year, and it's being driven by tablets as well as smartphones, and let's face it, economics, as schools are having to make harder and harder and harder decisions. Some school districts, I feel pretty certain, would have pretty close to 100% of the kids have a pretty nice laptop. Now, certainly there are other districts where that's going to be more like 20%, and maybe they're not that nice, but if we could figure out where to put the money so that everybody had an adequate one, whether some brought them or some of them had them subsidized, that's how those discussions are going on. And it's creating a lot of interesting conversations around policy as well, because mobile phones in particular have always been viewed, in fact, one of the biggest challenges to mobiles has always been their potential to disrupt the classroom, and not in the good way. Go ahead, Steve.
So actually, I was going to ask a different question. I'm interested in the degree to which it feels as though technology underlies these larger social trends, but is not the core trend itself. So is this new? Have you been doing trends for 10 years, and have you seen a change in what you consider to be a trend, or have your trends always been sort of less technological?
I think they are changing. I think they're becoming less technological because we're getting to the point where the technology is becoming more and more transparent. And even as, if there's interesting things that we want to think about, and having a frame of augmented reality makes that possible to think about it very specifically, the way that education is changing is not something that augmented reality is going to really play a huge part in. It may be an interesting way that we solve some cost issues with chemistry labs or physics labs or some other things, but there are other pressures out in the world, and that wasn't always the case, because it hasn't been that long ago that we didn't even have networks in schools, and so when we look back over the last 10 years, there really was a lot of building out that had to be done, and so the trends were much more focused on those sorts of things, and now what is interesting to me is how, for example, the third one there, education paradigms are shifting to include online learning, hybrid learning, and collaborative models, is, as much as anything, not a response. I mean, certainly that's because the technology supports it, but it's also because those are strategies that alternatives to traditional education are embracing. And there are some successes being seen with some of those, and so that's opening the door to thinking about, well, how might those be used here? And likewise, the last one on challenge-based active sorts of learning approaches is similar to that those are very much enabled by kids having 24/7 access to the internet and multimedia web-enabled machines, but it only works when those are really more like pencils.
It seems like there's a little bit of a feedback loop here, that the technology enables the shifting of the narrative. The shifting of the narrative opens the door to using the technology. Do you think that's sort of a self-reinforcing feedback there?
Well, I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah, there's certainly bound to be some of that in what's going on. Certainly, as the way that Doug Engelbart used to think about technology was that it augmented human capability, and if we buy into that, which I think I do, then it makes sense that as our capabilities increase, our options increase. but we keep coming back to wanting to have tools that will help us to continue to augment and expand those capabilities. So certainly it's a bit of a feedback loop in here, and haven't been very good at scanning the chat questions. And so
I'm trying to bring them up as they come up. The only one I think we missed was there was a question about differences between your results based on geography. Are there differences in the kinds of results you see?
Oh, absolutely. That's one reason why we do the regional reports. You know, what's interesting is the big set of technologies worldwide, and I mean worldwide even in the sense of Africa and rural India. People are looking worldwide at the same big collection of possible technology choices. And, you know, there's some of them that really sound like science fiction, like wireless power and other sorts of things that we're tracking, because they have the potential to really change things. And they're interesting. But as we come down to what are the choices that you're going to make in the next 5 years, those choices are very much determined not so much by technology or wealth or anything like that, as much as they're determined by local policies. And so, for example, we have some folks from Australia in the mix, and this is changing in Australia. But you know, for the last few years, and actually it's still true for home internet, as I understand it. But you had a disincentive to use the internet. The more you use the internet, not only did you pay more, you paid by the bit, but as your usage went up, the cost per bit goes up as well. So it not only becomes more expensive because you use more, but the rate at which it becomes more expensive accelerates in this pricing model that really discourage people from being interested in technologies that really required a lot of bandwidth. And so we saw things like augmented reality being less interesting in Australia simply because it was going to be too expensive to implement them. Now that's changing. They have a national broadband plan that is hoping to do that. And Stephanie asked, is that unique to Australia? No, it's not unique to Australia. It is actually a factor of how the internet is built out in a particular country. Other countries like Korea, where the internet is everywhere, very fast, like 50 times faster than what AT&T calls broadband. they would even I mean, you can go to Korea and for $30 a month you're getting absolutely 50 megabits, not AT&T 50 megabits, but real 50 megabits all the time, up and down. It's just a different world of what's possible to do there. When you compare it to other places where the average bandwidth is less than a megabyte. Your options are different. But it's not just, what I would call predatory pricing, because I think that we need to think the policy on some of the ways that we allow the telephone companies to influence what we're able to do with the internet. That's a different discussion. But not to pick on Australia, but another good example in Australia was when the cloud was really starting to take over by storm in North America and Europe, and everybody was interested in looking at it. In Australia, the conversations were very different, and they were, well, wait a minute, who owns this data when you put it in the cloud, and what laws apply to it? And it really became a conversation about privacy and ultimately sovereignty. Who owns Australian data if we put it in a North American cloud? And people were concerned that their data would be subject to the Patriot Act and not to local Australian laws. Very valid very practical and sensible concerns. Now, 3 years later, there's a very robust Australian cloud industry. And what happened was some government impetus behind it, plus some very entrepreneurial folks down there and some people that just knew how to do it. Australia now is a leader globally in providing cloud services, not only for its own people, but they export cloud services. And so that was a case where the policy arena just wasn't ready for Australia to take advantage of the cloud. But as soon as they saw that, now the cloud is really being used all over.
So just because I know you have to leave at the top of the hour, we've got 9 minutes left.
Yeah, so why don't we just kind of jump up into the clouds and talk about what happened in Austin. We referred to it quite a few times, and I would encourage you to go and download the communique that came out of it. It'll have all the detail related to it. Plus, you'll be able to see from this news story, which is not on the top of our page anymore, but if you look at it in the news category, you'll be able to see it, and you can get to the talks that we had. But the basics of it were that we invited 100 thought leaders who had been part of our expert group. There's been more than 500 people do that because we refresh them all the time. And they came from 20 countries, and they spent 3 days first looking at what we'd learned over the last 10 years and then trying to extrapolate that and take it into the next. Steve, I think you'd agree it was an extraordinary meeting. I mean, I haven't been in a meeting where there was so much intellectual horsepower in one room. And one of the coolest things about it was that we had libraries, K-12, museums, and higher ed all in the same room, and just energetic and working. And what we came up with, and you can see the whole thing on this wiki, which is retreat.wiki.nmc.org. Retreat.wiki.nmc.org. Hi, Larry. It was a pretty great meeting. And the whole history of it there and everything about it and all of the ephemera and everything is in there. But what I wanted to show you is what the 10 metatrends were, and then that's what we'll close on. And these are the top 5. These are in priority order. The world of work is increasingly global and collaborative. I know Steve would agree with this, that his and my job, we're working all over the place all the time, and most of the people I know that are working for multinational companies are doing the same thing. You can be in a work group and you're going to have somebody from India and somebody from China and somebody from the UK and somebody from South America, all of them contributing, and you've got 5 people in 5 very different cultural groups represented. It's an interesting time. I feel that this is a very positive trend, but it has real implications for the way we help our kids learn to work with each other, I think. And then the second 2 are really about that work is not really bound to a place. People expect to be able to work wherever they want to, whenever they want to. And increasingly they're doing it over mobile networks. We spend a lot of time thinking about that. Deinstitutionalization, yeah, it's on the larger list, and I think that it's kind of a thread that's weaving through here, and part of it is this notion of openness. And one thing that came out of this very powerfully for me was that I've been thinking about open content, open data, open educational resources. All of those terms have been in the stew for a long time. But over the last couple of years, it's really shifted to become merged with notions of transparency and open access to data and information. And when you think of the Arab Spring and some of the things that have happened over the last few months, it feels like it's moving more to a value for education. And if that's the case, then how do we plug into that? If people see that the stuff we typically have done our stock and trade with can be replaced with good quality open content. What does that mean for us? And then just some of the basic things that help things work, like there are reasons for there to be rules about ownership and privacy, but I think everyone would agree that there's a lag between what people are actually doing, and I'm not just talking about piracy, although piracy is one dimension of it, but I'm also talking about sharing, which is kind of another way to talk about the same thing, only you want to do it. It's different. And then challenges that we see everywhere, particularly in countries like in Africa and India, challenges of access and efficiency and scale are really moving to the forefront. And I think a lot of people in that room would agree that we're going to see some really remarkable innovation over the next 10 years in this dimension, but it's going to come from those parts of the world. It's not going to come from us. And then the deinstitutionalization is also embedded in the fourth one here, the rise in informal learning. Marcia Stempel from the Institute of Museum and Library Services gave a wonderful talk that illustrated this so well. And she pointed out that we only spend 12.5% of our life in school, and that's from pre through graduate school. 12.5%. The other 88.5%, 87.5%, we're learning all the time, but we're learning other ways. We're learning in ways distinctly different than how we learned in school. Why do we choose those? And what could we learn from informal learning that could help make formal learning be more effective? And then also tied into that notion of deinstitutionalization is that the business models across education are shifting. Nobody really knows where textbooks are going to land, but publishers are sure interested in that conversation, I guarantee you. And they're working very, very hard. They know their landscape is shifting, and they're really working hard to be on solid ground when we get to the end. So those are the meta trends. I'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
You've got 2 minutes of your time left. Hey, one thing that was that I really thought was that came out of that retreat was this idea of pushing down the process, of helping people hold local events where they would go through this material at a local level. Has that gone anywhere? Have you had any interest or efforts in that direction?
We haven't actually tracked that. I'm glad you reminded me about that, though, because we have done some things out of the NMC, but we haven't seen the kind of grassroots sorts of efforts that were being talked about that day. And I think it's just a matter of figuring out a way to revisit that conversation. And some of the projects that you and I kicking around might actually be a way to do that. I think there's a lot of opportunity there and a lot of benefit to be had for people on the ground having conversations like the one we're having today in schools all over.
So Larry has a hard stop right at the end of the hour, so I'm going to click through here. I'm going to clap. I'm hovering over the smiley face icon in the participant window, and I'm going down to the applause button. Larry, thanks so much for coming on and sharing with us. We are the first to hear of those conclusions, and it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I want to thank everyone in the audience. It's really good, and so I'm going to let you know that you can reach me at johnson@nmc.org. If you'd like to be part of our work, you want to be one of our advisors, let us know. We are always looking for advisors. as I said, we refresh those groups all the time. And I want to also give a big shout out to Steve and the work he's doing across the board. And this session opened up and we just talked about all the many efforts that are going on with Classroom 2.0 and the future of education. I just think you're just doing fantastic work, Stephen. Please keep it up.
It's a mutual admiration society. Thanks, Larry. We're going to let you go so you're not late. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Have a great night.
Okay.
Again, great appreciation to Larry for all that work at New Media Consortium and the Horizon Reports. Take care.
Okay.
So if you want to save the chat, you can do so by going up to File and Save. I'm going to turn Larry's mic off here so you can hear the echoes. You can go to File and Save, and you can save the whiteboard or the chat. You can also save those from the recording if you would like. And I'll have the recording posted later tonight or tomorrow, both in full Collaborate form and in MP3. Thanks, everybody. Sure appreciate you being here. Have a great night or day, depending on where you are.